Thank you so much for the support over on Patreon, RICKRACK. WWE marks complaining about AEW fans. AEW marks complaining about WWE fans. Oh, this partisan way of thinking is everywhere nowadays. However, in the end, being a professional wrestling fan is not something you could really qualitate because it is a subjective thing at best. And if you ever stop to think about it, you'll realize that AEW or WWE, well, they're guilty of a lot of the same crimes. Which I'm about to point out, because today... Alright, so I know the normal gimmick around here is a mere 7. However, there are just so many smart crimes that both companies are guilty of that tribalists on either side refuse to admit to. And I'm sure that no matter what I say or do, there are definitely going to be sensitive little smarks who feel that I'm picking on their company more so than the other. And might I remind you that this list video is a criticism of both companies. And I'm simply trying to advocate for the old adage of those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Now, I hope I made myself clear, and with that being said, let's get into the video. Keep on pushing. Many wrestling fans detest how WWE keeps pushing acts that are blatantly not over, like Baron Corbin or Roman Reigns. However, I didn't exactly see All Elite Wrestling giving up on the Dark Order right away either. In fact, they even brought in Brody Lee to try and save it when it really should have just been an aborted mission long before Luke Harper ever signed with the company. And how long did it take him to take the belt off of Riho, but we'll be getting into that more later on. Dive! Randy Orton once retweeted a Rip Rogers critique on professional wrestling in the indie scene and its heavy use of outside dives. And when AEW formed, a lot of their workers, like the Young Bucks, came from that exact independent wrestling style that incorporated a lot of dives and other flips and acrobatics that some claim aren't wrestling. Now, I'm not arguing whether or not that is so here, because that's not the point of this entry. The point here is that while there are a lot of dives and flips in AEW, let's not pretend like WWE doesn't do the exact same thing. It seems like every WWE show has at least one wrestler who takes a dive to the outside. Furthermore, wrestlers like Ricochet, who were the direct targets of these criticisms back a few years ago, now work for WWE. And again, this is not a statement for or against acrobatics. I'm just saying that both companies do a lot of jumping, so why should anyone jump to conclusions about the other brand? Oh, and this ruling also applies to leg slapping too. Old times. During the 90s, WWF took their fair share of shots at WCW for having older talent. Flash forward to now, and we've seen Bill Goldberg win the Universal title twice, and he's currently in his 50s. Or how about either time when WWE brought Dave Bautista back? And let's not forget about the newly returned and newly injured Edge. The company often relies on older talent, even sometimes at the expense of making new stars. However, so does AEW. Chris Jericho is pushing 50, and he was the first AEW champion ever over the likes of Hangman Page or Kenny Omega. And fine, the current champion of Jon Moxley is considerably younger. But don't forget that the first tag champions were SCU. Now look, to be clear, both companies do have a lot of younger talent and a lot of younger champions. But the point here is that there were a lot of opportunities that could have gone to fresh faces instead of seasoned ones. And again, even if you think that's perfectly logical, this is not a criticism about the practice, but rather just pointing out that both companies do it. Blood and guts. WWE made a comment about AEW being all blood and guts, following acts like the gruesome match between Cody and Dustin Rhodes, as well as the brutal chair shot from Shawn Spears, claiming that the promotion was just about a bit of the ultra-violence. This prompted AEW to even name an event Blood and Guts, which I have tickets to, but it keeps getting delayed for, well, obvious reasons. Anyway, while this statement may be all well and good, let's not forget that WWE has plenty of blood on their hands too, because this is the same company that had Brock Lesnar hardweight Randy Orton with his elbows, as well as the awful eye for an eye match between Rey Mysterio and Seth Rollins. Oh, and remember when Shayna Baszler went all vampire on Becky Lynch? So which company is supposed to be the violent one? Because when you look at it that way, I really can't tell the difference. Keep your distance. WWE has received a lot of grief during these times for their lack of a protocol when it comes to preventative measures, particularly with their failure to socially distance and have their audience members wear masks. But let's not forget that AEW was definitely doing this first. Dynamite had wrestlers standing shoulder to shoulder, exposed face and all, long before Monday Night Raw was. Now granted, WWE has had much worse results by a long shot, which even ended up causing AEW's champion Jon Moxley to miss out on Fyter Fest because his wife Renee Young was infected. However, just because AEW has been more fortunate than WWE, that doesn't change that they didn't exactly conduct 100% safe practices either. Superstars. Many apologists for WWE have dumped on AEW for not having any megastars, and say that it's just a company full of nobodies who can't draw. Well, I will say that does sound a bit harsh. However, if that is so, I also need to point out that I don't exactly see The Rock and Stone Cold still wrestling for WWE either. Personally, I do think that while yes, charisma and star power are great gifts that some are just born with, I do also feel that presentation and how much a performer is promoted by the promotion does play a major role in the equation, so I don't feel like all of the onus should be on the wrestler's shoulders. But that aside, I also feel that if somebody bags on AEW star power, then they shouldn't be pretending like WWE is bringing in the ratings like they were during the Attitude Era either. And yes, Raw and SmackDown are still doing far better than Dynamite in that department, but what I am getting at is that either way, no company for whatever reason is featuring a gigantic megastar like Hulk Hogan who's bringing in the ratings as the face of the company. Women's Club. WWE has gotten their fair share of flack for not properly utilizing their female roster, with complaints that their women wrestlers are seldom given storylines or enough airtime save for a select handful, with many fans wishing that the company would just make better use of their female talent. However, how is AEW really any different? Their first champion Riho was a part-timer, barely ever there, just like Brock Lesnar. And as for the rest of the division, they were hardly featured or given compelling storylines either. Then when they finally started heading in that direction, it was still only a select handful that have been getting the attention. So to me, it doesn't seem like AEW's women's roster is really any different from Raw or SmackDown's. It is to laugh. Okay, I know what some of you are thinking. AEW is just a bunch of goofy comedy cartoon nonsense and is a total joke. The silly video game costumes of the Bucks and Omega playing dress up, Orange Cassidy exposes the business, and that Nakazawa baby oil routine is the stupidest act that has ever been put in the ring. But hold on, because isn't WWE the same company that aired that silly Viking Raiders and Street Profits sketch calling itself a match? And also, yet again, I have to remind everyone that no one sells for Orange Cassidy's light attacks, they only sell when he's actually wrestling. And furthermore, as far as that baby oil is concerned, Enzo Amore did that on WWE TV before Nakazawa ever did. So listen, if you don't like professional wrestling being treated as a joke, I totally understand. But unfortunately for you, as much as you don't like it, both WWE and AEW sure seem to. Tag team, not back again. Similar to the argument about AEW's women's division, All Elite Wrestling promised to put more focus on tag team wrestling, but I can't really tell that there is. Single bouts are still the primary emphasis of the company, but also remember that WWE did have a main event with Becky Lynch and Charlotte going against Asuka and Kairi Sane at TLC, and that was for the women's tag titles. Now okay, with that aside, some of you are going to say that AEW tag matches are just simply better, with bouts like Lucha Brothers versus the Young Bucks. And while everyone does have their own opinion about what they like better, I still think it's fair to say that WWE has also put on great tag matches too, like with the New Day versus the Usos, or most of the tag team title matches in NXT. Number 10. Ronnie O'Neal is a tremendous talent who is not getting pushed the way he ought to be. He only gets quick flourishes of camera time, and no matter how over he is, the company just seems to forget about him. Now, which promotion am I talking about? I know, you can't tell the difference either now, can you? WWE didn't treat Ty Dillinger all that well despite the success of his Perfect 10 gimmick, even in NXT. However, also despite his popularity, AEW really hasn't done all that much better with him either. So far, on both promotions, he pops up briefly, does something somewhat noteworthy, and then disappears yet again. Doesn't matter if it's Vince or Cody, doesn't matter if it's a Perfect 10 or Spears, the guy just can't catch a break. Storytelling. Over the past year or so, I have noticed that AEW has been picking up their game in the storytelling department. No, it's not flawless by any stretch of the imagination, but the heels and faces are getting better defined. And in the ring, I am noticing that classic wrestling storytelling elements are becoming a bit more noticeable. Now, I'm not trying to say that it's as good as old school WWF, but I am trying to say that it's probably on par with current WWE. Sometimes we do get spot fests, sometimes we do get good stories, some parts are told well and other parts seem to get drawn out for far too long. Sometimes WWE is ahead like with Velveteen Dream and Aleister Black, but with other times I would say that it's AEW that's ahead. Because personally, I think that Chris Jericho and Orange Cassidy told a pretty good story, with Jericho resorting to cheating in order to override Orange Cassidy as he was truly surprised by the Orange One's offense. And I also feel that the aforementioned Cody and Dustin Rhodes was absolutely fantastic. All in all, for me, both companies seem to be about the same. Also, in terms of storylines, while I too feel that the Jeff Hardy-Sheamus storyline is being done in poor taste, I also felt the same way when AEW did it with Hangman Page. No Sale University. Now, are we gonna pretend like only one company does this? Look, a lot of old school wrestlers are heavily annoyed at how much a lot of today's talent doesn't sell moves, and that is something that the older types say for talent in both companies, not just AEW, despite what many on the internet will have you believe. Both promotions do have wrestlers that sell moves very well, but there are also a lot of wrestlers in both companies who act like nothing happened to them 10 seconds after getting hit with something huge. Or they do things like run and climb up the top rope in between limping, or they flip their hair back while acting like they're in pain. In the end, neither wrestling company is immune from having their wrestlers acting like they're immune from wrestling. Counter-programming. AEW apologists will rally against WWE for counter-programming, with the Great American Bash or with moving NXT to USA. But let's not forget that AEW was the one that struck first, with Dynamite originally being rumored to air on Tuesday nights but found itself on Wednesday instead. And while yes, NXT did move to the USA network following that announcement, let's not pretend like NXT wasn't already on Wednesday nights first on the WWE network. Outlaw Mud Show. AEW has been called an outlaw indie mud show. However, we should remember that that is exactly how WWE got started in the first place. An outlaw territory was a term designated to a promotion that was not a part of the National Wrestling Alliance, which WWE was at first but then broke away from, and with their success it would make WWE the outlaw promotion if ever there was one. And as far as that mud show part goes, Vincent Kennedy McMahon's product has been called not real wrestling pretty much ever since it began, with the Hulkamania era being called cartoony with all of the over-the-top gimmicks, and the Attitude Era with its antics was also said to not be real wrestling back then either, which they also even said on their own programming. So as far as not being part of the NWA and not being a real professional wrestling product, well, that's something that WWE pretty much wrote the book on. And when it comes to AEW, if they are an outlaw promotion, well, maybe WWE should just view it that imitation is the best form of flattery. The fans. And finally, both parties claim that the other side has really toxic fans. And you know what? You're both right. AEW and WWE do both have plenty of non-tribalist fans who aren't completely nuts. Fans who understand that you could like both companies or you can dislike both companies, or fans that understand that you could both like and dislike different parts of each. However, while they do both have plenty of intelligent fans, they also have plenty of fans who are the complete opposite, with some AEW loyalists feeling like they are somehow superior to other wrestling fans because they like the more obscure product, therefore elevating them above the rest. And on the other hand, you have WWE loyalists who feel that if they can understand and comprehend the decision making behind the biggest and most successful wrestling company of all time, then obviously they are better wrestling fans. Even Cody himself has mentioned that some AEW fans defend the company too much and need to learn to admit when AEW does something wrong, because they're just starting out and they are definitely going to make mistakes. And the same goes to fans out there who keep defending WWE and refuse to admit that there are things that are significantly bad right now, and they go out of their way to justify all of the dumb decisions that Vince McMahon and company make. Overall, you don't have to choose sides. This isn't your parents' divorce. You can like both, you can dislike both, and there is definitely plenty of criticism to go around for everybody. So I say anyone who aggressively defends either company or fiercely attacks fans of the other side or draws a line in the sand is a complete idiot. Well, there you go, 15 things that WWE and AEW are both guilty of. And if you're not an idiot and can think of some more things that both companies do that only one seems to get heat for, well, let me know that down in the comments. And also, if you can please hit that subscribe button, as I know there are a bunch of you out there watching this that aren't subscribed, but you ought to be, and while you're at it, subscribe to the comic book channel too, that definitely needs some love. And last but certainly not least, a big thank you to all my Patreon supporters out there, and I want to remind you that there is still time to vote on those exclusive polls. Thank you again for watching. And as always, Dave knows.